The dying light of sunset cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Sweetwater Creek as Katherine Porter stumbled toward the saloon, her threadbare dress hanging from her gaunt frame and her infant daughter wailing against her chest. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, saving every morsel for her baby, but now even that wasn't enough. Her milk was drying up, and desperation had driven her to this last resort. It was 1874, and the drought that had plagued Texas for months had turned the once prosperous cattle town into a place of quiet desperation. Katherine had arrived 3 weeks ago after her husband's death on the trail from St. Louis, leaving her alone with their 3-month-old daughter Emma and dwindling prospects. Inside the Golden Spur Saloon, Garrett Graves sat at a corner table with his 6-year-old son, Timothy. Unlike the other patrons who were drinking and gambling away their troubles, Garrett nursed a single glass of sarsaparilla while Timothy played with his prized wooden horse, a birthday gift from his father who had carved it himself during the long winter nights. "Pa, when can we go home?" Timothy asked, his small fingers tracing the smooth edges of the toy. "Soon, son. Just waiting on Mr. Jenkins to finish his business," Garrett replied, his eyes scanning the room. At 32, the widowed cattle rancher had built a modest spread outside of town, raising his boy alone since his wife died in childbirth 4 years prior. The saloon doors swung open, and Katherine entered, the infant's cries drawing all eyes to her. She stood just inside the entrance, swaying slightly, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. Garrett recognized the look of someone at the end of their rope. He'd worn it himself after losing Sarah. Katherine approached the bar, her voice barely audible over her daughter's wails. "Please, sir." "A cup of milk for my baby." The bartender, a hard-faced man named Fletcher, scoffed. "This ain't no charity house, lady. Pay or be on your way." Katherine's trembling fingers fumbled with a small pouch. She withdrew a single, crumpled dollar bill, all she had left in the world. "I'll give you my last dollar, just feed my baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. The bartender hesitated, then reached for the money. Before his fingers closed around it, Timothy slipped from his father's side and approached the desperate mother. Without a word, the boy held up his wooden horse, offering it to the crying infant. "Madam," the child said, "maybe she'd like my toy. Pa says it helps when you're sad." Katherine's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at the generous child. "That's very kind, but Fletcher," Garrett called out, rising from his seat. "Give the lady a bottle of milk and some bread. Put it on my tab." The bartender frowned but nodded, disappearing into the back room. Garrett approached Katherine, tipping his hat. "Madam, I'm Garrett Graves." "This here's my boy, Timothy." "Katherine Porter," she replied, her voice thin with fatigue. "And this is Emma." "Looks like you two could use a proper meal," Garrett said. "We were just about to have supper at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. Would you join us?" Katherine's pride warred with her desperation. "I couldn't impose, it's no imposition," Garrett insisted. "Just neighborly kindness." Timothy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Pa, can they come stay with us? Miss Emma needs a nice bed and we got plenty." Garrett smiled at his son's innocent suggestion. "One step at a time, Timmy." He turned back to Katherine. "Let's start with supper, and we can figure out the rest after you've had something to eat." The bartender returned with milk in a glass bottle. Katherine fed her daughter with trembling hands, relief washing over her face as the infant's cries subsided to contented gurgles. That night at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, Katherine ate her first full meal in days. As she recounted her journey and the circumstances that had left her destitute, Garrett listened with growing concern and admiration for her resilience. "My husband Daniel took sick on the trail," she explained, cradling the now sleeping Emma. "Fever took him in 3 days. The wagon train couldn't wait, so they helped me bury him and gave me enough supplies to reach the next town. She swallowed hard. Those supplies ran out last week. You've been alone with a baby for that long. Garrett shook his head. That takes courage, Mrs. Porter. Katherine, please, she said, and it wasn't courage so much as necessity. Timothy, who had been quietly listening, said, My ma died when I was little. Pa says she's watching over us from heaven. Katherine smiled gently at the boy. I'm sure she is, Timothy. Just like Emma's father is watching over her. Garrett cleared his throat, suddenly feeling a need to offer something more substantial than sympathy. I've got a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. Nothing fancy, but there's a cabin out back that my ranch hand used before he moved on last month. It's yours if you want it, at least until you figure out your next steps. Katherine stared at him, searching for any sign of impropriety in his offer. Finding none in his earnest expression, she said, Why would you do that for a stranger? Garrett's eyes drifted to his son. Because someone did the same for me and Timothy after Sarah passed. Sometimes folks need a helping hand, not charity. You can earn your keep if you're worried about taking handouts. We could use help around the house. The next morning, Garrett's wagon carried Katherine and Emma to the Double G Ranch. The main house was modest but well built, with a sturdy barn and corrals for the cattle. The cabin he'd mentioned sat 50 yards from the main house, small but clean, with a bed, table, and cookstove. It's not much, Garrett said apologetically as he carried her few belongings inside. It's perfect, Katherine replied, looking around with genuine appreciation. After weeks of uncertainty, the simple shelter felt like a palace. Over the following days, Katherine settled into a routine. While Emma napped, she helped with household chores, proving herself capable in the kitchen and with a needle. Garrett, who had been managing alone with only Timothy's help and occasional assistance from neighboring women, found himself enjoying regular home-cooked meals again. Timothy took to Katherine immediately, trailing her around the ranch and asking endless questions about Emma. The boy had never spent time around a baby before, and his fascination was endearing. Was I that small once, Miss Katherine? He asked one afternoon as she rocked Emma on the porch. Even smaller, she replied with a smile. All babies start tiny and grow strong just like you have. Pa says I'm growing like a weed, Timothy said proudly. Soon I'll be big enough to help with the cattle drives. Katherine laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been so long since she'd had reason to laugh. I'm sure you will, but don't be in too much of a hurry to grow up. From the corral where he was breaking a new horse, Garrett heard her laughter and paused in his work. The sound sparked something in him he thought had died with Sarah. He caught himself watching Katherine more often than was proper, admiring her quiet strength and the gentle way she handled both children. 2 weeks after Katherine's arrival, a spring storm rolled in, bringing much-needed rain but also fierce winds that rattled the small cabin. Shortly after midnight, a frantic knocking at the main house door woke Garrett from a light sleep. He opened the door to find Katherine standing there, drenched and frightened, clutching Emma to her chest. The cabin roof is leaking, she explained, water streaming down her face. The bed's soaked through. Come in, Garrett ushered them inside. You can take my room tonight, I'll bunk with Timothy. I couldn't put you out of your bed, Katherine protested. You're not putting me anywhere, I'm offering, Garrett said firmly. First thing tomorrow, I'll fix that roof, but tonight you and Emma need dry beds. As they stood in the dim lamplight of the hallway, something shifted between them. Katherine looked up at him, vulnerability and gratitude mingling in her eyes. Garrett felt an overwhelming urge to protect her, to ensure she never knew such desperation again. Thank you, she whispered, and for a moment neither moved. The moment broke when Emma stirred against her chest, and Garrett stepped back, suddenly aware of their proximity. "Get some rest," he said gruffly, retreating to Timothy's room. The next day, Garrett made good on his promise, spending the morning repairing the cabin roof. Katherine brought him lunch, and they sat together on the cabin steps while Emma slept inside and Timothy played nearby. "You don't talk much about before," Katherine observed. "About Sarah." Garrett set down his sandwich, surprised by her directness. "Not much to say that doesn't bring pain," he admitted. "She was everything to me. When she died bringing Timothy into this world, I thought I might follow her from grief." "What stopped you?" "Him." Garrett nodded toward his son. "He needed me, and I found that having someone who depends on you is powerful medicine against giving up." Katherine nodded. "Emma saved me the same way after Daniel died. I couldn't surrender to grief because she needed me to be strong." Their eyes met in understanding, two souls who had walked similar paths of loss and responsibility. "Katherine," Garrett began hesitantly, "I know you'll want to move on eventually, make your own way, but there's no rush. Winter's coming, and traveling with a baby then isn't wise." "Are you asking me to stay through winter?" "I'm asking you to consider it," he said. "Timothy adores you and Emma." "And he paused, searching for words that wouldn't frighten her away. "I've grown accustomed to having you around." Katherine smiled, recognizing the admission for what it was, not quite a declaration, but more than mere convenience. "We'll stay through winter then," she agreed. "If you're certain we're not a burden." "The opposite," Garrett said quietly. "The house feels like a home again with you here." As summer gave way to fall, Katherine's presence at the Double G became less that of a guest and more of a fixture. She moved with increasing confidence around the property, learning the rhythms of ranch life. Emma grew plump and happy, crawling across blankets spread on the grass while Katherine hung laundry or helped with the garden harvest. Garrett found excuses to be near the house more often than ranch work typically allowed. He taught Katherine to ride, his hands lingering at her waist as he helped her into the saddle. She taught him to make his mother's apple pie recipe, their fingers brushing as they worked the dough together. Each small touch, each shared smile, wove another thread between them, creating something neither had expected to find again. Timothy observed these changes with a child's simple acceptance. One evening, as Garrett tucked him into bed, the boy asked, "Pa, do you like Miss Katherine?" Garrett smoothed his son's hair back from his forehead. "Of course I do, son. She's a fine woman." "No, I mean, do you like her like you liked Ma? Mrs. Holloway says a boy needs a mother and Emma needs a pa." Garrett chuckled at his son's directness. "Mrs. Holloway should mind her own business," he said, but without heat. "These things take time, Timothy." "But you do like her," Timothy pressed. "I see you looking at her when you think nobody's watching." Garrett felt heat rise in his face. "Maybe I do," he admitted. "But that doesn't mean Miss Katherine feels the same way." Timothy yawned. "She does. She looks at you the same way when you're not looking." The boy's innocent observation stayed with Garrett as he sat alone on the porch that night, watching the stars emerge. Could Timothy be right? He'd been so focused on not frightening Katherine away that he hadn't allowed himself to consider she might welcome his interest. The first snowfall came early that year, blanketing the ranch in white by mid-November. Katherine awoke to find Timothy at her cabin door, eager to show Emma her first snow. Though the baby was too young to appreciate it, Katherine bundled her up and followed Timothy outside. Garrett joined them, and soon an impromptu snowball fight erupted between him and his son, with Katherine laughing and serving as referee. When Timothy aimed a particularly well-packed snowball at his father, Garrett dramatically fell backward into a snowdrift, pretending to be mortally wounded. "I got you, Pa," Timothy crowed triumphantly. "Indeed you did," Garrett groaned. "I'm done for. Tell Miss Katherine she can have my ranch. You're too young to run it yourself." Katherine's laughter faltered. "Don't even joke about such things, Garrett Graves." Something in her tone made him look up. He saw genuine distress in her eyes, a flash of old grief. Garrett stood, brushing snow from his clothes, and moved to her side. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That was thoughtless of me." She shook her head. "No, I'm being silly." "It's just—" She stopped, adjusting Emma in her arms. "Just what?" he prompted gently. Katherine looked up at him, vulnerability naked in her expression. "I couldn't bear to lose anyone else I care about." The admission hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Before Garrett could respond, Timothy shouted for their attention, having created a small snowman. The moment passed, but Garrett carried her words with him throughout the day. She cared about him. Perhaps Timothy had been right after all. That evening, after Timothy was asleep and Emma settled in her makeshift cradle near Katherine's bed, Garrett invited Katherine to sit by the fire in the main house. He poured them each a small glass of brandy, a luxury he rarely indulged in. "To warmth in winter," he toasted, and she smiled, taking a small sip. "I've been thinking," Garrett began, staring into the flames. "About spring." Katherine tensed beside him. "What about it? You mentioned wanting to continue west eventually to California." He kept his voice neutral, though the thought of her leaving had begun to feel like a physical pain. "Is that still your plan?" Katherine was quiet for so long that he finally looked at her. She was watching him intently. "That was Daniel's plan," she said finally. "I followed because he was my husband, and that's what wives do. But it was never my dream." "And what is your dream, Katherine Porter?" She set down her glass. "It's changed. Before losing Daniel, I dreamed of a small house with a garden, children running in the yard. Simple things." She paused. "Now I dream of safety, stability for Emma, a place where she can grow up loved and protected." "And where do you see that place being?" Garrett asked, his heart hammering in his chest. "I'm beginning to think it might be here," she said softly, "if we're welcome to stay." Garrett set his own glass down and turned to face her fully. "Katherine, you and Emma have brought life back to this house, to Timothy. To me. I can't imagine this place without you now." He reached for her hand and she let him take it. "I know it's too soon, and I don't want to press you when you're still grieving, but I need you to know that if you decided to stay permanently, it would make me the happiest man in Texas." Katherine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Garrett Graves?" "Not yet," he said, squeezing her hand. "But I'm telling you that someday I hope to, when you're ready, if you could ever see me as more than the man who helped you in a desperate moment." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I already do," she whispered. "You've become so much more than that to both of us." Garrett reached up to brush the tear away, his hand lingering on her cheek. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. When they parted, Katherine's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "I think," she said, "that Emma and I have found our home." As winter deepened, Katherine moved from the cabin into the main house, taking the spare bedroom. It was a practical decision. The cabin was difficult to keep warm, and having Emma closer meant less trudging through snow for Garrett when the baby cried at night, and he insisted on helping. But it was also an acknowledgement of the changing nature of their relationship. They were building something together, day by day. Katherine took over running the household completely, freeing Garrett to focus on the ranch. In the evenings, they would sit together after the children were asleep, planning improvements to the property, discussing cattle prices, or simply enjoying the comfort of shared companionship. By Christmas, the transformation of the Double G was remarkable. Katherine had sewn new curtains, arranged dried flowers in previously empty vases, and filled the house with the constant aromas of home cooking. More importantly, she had filled it with warmth that went beyond the physical, with laughter, tenderness, and growing love. On Christmas Eve, after Timothy had finally fallen asleep in eager anticipation of the morning, Garrett and Katherine sat before the fire, wrapping the simple gifts they had prepared. For Timothy, Katherine had sewn a new shirt and scarf, while Garrett had carved a set of wooden farm animals to accompany the horse that had first brought them together. For Emma, too young to appreciate gifts, they had a soft blanket Katherine had quilted from scraps of fabric. As Katherine tied a ribbon around Timothy's package, Garrett reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, wrapped box. "This one's for you," he said, placing it in her hand. "Garrett, we agreed not to exchange gifts," Katherine protested mildly. "I haven't anything for you." "You've given me plenty already," he assured her. "Open it." Katherine carefully untied the ribbon and removed the paper. Inside the box was a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. "It was my mother's," Garrett explained. "My father gave it to her when they homesteaded this land." "It's not fancy, but it's beautiful," Katherine interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. Garrett took her hand. "Katherine Porter, I know we haven't known each other long in the counting of months, but I feel like I've known your heart forever. You came into our lives when we least expected but most needed someone like you." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I love the mother you are to Emma and the way you've mothered Timothy without trying to replace Sarah in his memory. I love your strength and your kindness." He slipped from his chair to one knee, still holding her hand. "I'm asking if you'll marry me, make this house your permanent home, and let me be a father to Emma as you've been a mother to my son." Tears spilled freely down Katherine's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." They were married on New Year's Day, 1875, in the small church in Sweetwater Creek. The entire town turned out, partly from genuine goodwill and partly from curiosity about the mysterious woman who had captured the heart of the widowed rancher. Mrs. Holloway, who had appointed herself unofficial guardian of propriety, had initially clucked her tongue at the hasty courtship. But watching Katherine walk down the aisle in a cream-colored dress she'd remade from one of her better gowns, with little Emma in her arms and Timothy proudly walking beside her, even the stern widow had to admit they made a handsome family. Judge Patterson, who also served as the town's preacher, kept the ceremony brief in deference to the children's patience. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett's kiss was tender but held the promise of deeper passion to come. The celebration afterward at the Golden Spur saloon, cleared of its usual vices for the occasion, was boisterous and joyful. Fletcher, the once surly bartender, served punch instead of whiskey and even managed a smile when Katherine thanked him for his kindness on the day they'd met. "Never thought I'd see the day Garrett Graves remarried," commented Jenkins, the cattle broker who had inadvertently brought them together by keeping Garrett waiting in the saloon that fateful evening. "You found yourself a fine woman." "Found myself a miracle," Garrett corrected, his eyes following Katherine as she moved through the crowd with Emma, accepting congratulations and introducing herself to those she hadn't yet met. Timothy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Pa, does this mean I can call Miss Katherine Ma now?" Garrett knelt to his son's level. "That's something you should ask her, son, and only if you feel ready. Your mother will always be your mother even though she's gone." Timothy nodded solemnly. "I know, but I think Ma would like Katherine. She makes you smile again." Garrett hugged his son, amazed at the wisdom that sometimes emerged from his young mind. "Yes, she does." Later that night, after the celebrations had ended and they had returned to the ranch, their ranch now, Truly, Garrett carried a sleeping Timothy to his bed while Katherine settled Emma in the cradle. They had moved to their bedroom. When Garrett entered their room, he found Katherine standing by the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape. She had changed from her wedding dress into a simple white nightgown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. "Having second thoughts, Mrs. Graves?" he asked softly. She turned, and the love in her eyes took his breath away. "Not a single one, Mr. Graves." He crossed to her and took her in his arms. "If someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be standing here with you as my wife, I'd have called them crazy. And if someone had told me when I stumbled into that saloon that the cowboy with the kind son would become my husband, I'd have thought the same," Katherine replied. "Yet here we are, he echoed, drawing her closer. "And here we'll stay, God willing, for many years to come." As spring returned to the Double G Ranch, life settled into new patterns. Katherine's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables for their table. Emma took her first steps in the kitchen, toddling from Katherine to Garrett with squeals of delight. Timothy started school in town, riding in proudly on his own pony that Garrett had trained especially for him. And in late April, as wildflowers carpeted the hills around the ranch, Katherine shared news that completed their joy. By Christmas, their family would grow by one more. Standing on the porch one evening, Garrett's arm around his wife's waist and their children playing in the yard before them, Katherine leaned her head against his shoulder. "You ever think about how close we came to never meeting?" she asked. "If I hadn't entered that particular saloon on that particular evening." Garrett kissed the top of her head. "I prefer to think that some things are meant to be, no matter what path we take to get there." Katherine smiled, watching Timothy show his wooden horse to Emma for the 100th time, the toy that had first connected their families, now a treasured heirloom. "I gave you my last dollar," she mused, "and gained everything I ever wanted." "And I gained far more than I ever dreamed possible," Garrett replied, turning her in his arms to kiss her properly. There in the golden light of sunset, surrounded by the life they had built together from the most desperate of beginnings. In the years that followed, the story of how they met became family legend, told and retold around the dinner table as their children grew and the ranch prospered. The tale of a desperate mother, a generous boy, and the cowboy who opened his heart and home to them, both a reminder that sometimes, in our darkest moments, we find the brightest futures if only we have the courage to reach for them.